Worldness makes me suffer, so let me be worldless. Peopleness makes me suffer, so let me be peopleless. This is my attitude, but it also was my attitude. It's both present tense and past tense at the same time because I have ventured into the outside world more frequently as of late, and I find that it does not make me suffer so as long as I am disengaged with people, with the exception of transactional interactions. So, for example, I'll have my headphones in. I'll usually listen to a podcast of my personal choice, and I'll walk about a mile to my local Starbucks, and I'll go there and I'll read my book. And sometimes depending on how my budget is, I'll go to a restaurant and I will sit down and dine in by myself. And I find that this actually helps a great deal with my depression. But prior to this, I did an experiment where I wanted to completely alienate myself, where I would embrace nothing but isolation. And while I was in this isolated state, I would likewise be fasted, sober, and chaste. However, I found after a couple months of doing this, I suffered from a depression that was so severe that it bordered on suicidality. But it's not that I would ever act upon it. It's as if depression, boredom, and suicidality are different severities of a spectrum, and they're all more or less synonyms to one degree or another. So when I say that I feel so bad, I wish I was dead, it is nothing more than feeling as such, most likely never to act upon it. And this is what I refer to as torture of the bedroom. There is something excruciatingly painful, or even torturous and terrifying, about the very thing that I swore I would make a higher power, that I would embrace. And that was silence and quietude. But I was left with four walls, a ceiling, and a floor, and my mattress and the cushion upon my ass in which I sit. And I found that my life was no better than a prisoner's life. They too, like myself, have a toilet, have a sink with running water, have food that they can put in the microwave, they have a mattress, they have a floor that they can pace back and forth in. They could read a book, like I do. And I found that you cannot escape suffering in this world. For example, if food makes you suffer because you are a glutton and you have some kind of an eating disorder or an addictive personality when it comes to it, if you make yourself be fasted you are just going to suffer in hunger. And the little bit of salience that you could have received from that Marie Callender's pot pie that you could have put in the microwave for 5 minutes and eat, that dopamine release that would have severed you, at least temporarily, from your boredom was not an option. At least the prisoner and the lunatic in the madhouse, at least they can preoccupy themselves for long hours with masturbation, but I didn't even allow myself to do that. So, you say, well, yeah, I suffer with post-nut fatigue. Yeah, but if you don't engage in that, you also suffer with blue balls and extreme sexual agitation, where you're sort of haunted, where your consciousness is being actively molested by the sensation of hunger and the sensation of sexual agitation. And when you feel into those types of agitations and you compare them with relieving your sexual organ or eating a meal, you might conclude that if food makes you suffer and sexual expenditure makes you suffer, be that as it may, the absence of those two things also makes you suffer, but in a very different way. Unless, of course, you are a Eastern spiritualist, where you have reached such a state of nirvana that you have obtained moksha. And that's what I was trying to do. But I found that when I was fasted, I suffered in hunger. When I was celibate, I suffered with blue balls and sexual agitation. And it was a extreme kind of suffering that never subsided. So, when I tried to embrace quietude and stillness, I found myself bored out of my mind. And it starts out as boredom, but that kind of self-putrefaction, or the unbearable heaviness of your own consciousness alone with itself, that desires to be distracted from this state of sensory deprivation, from this state of mind-numbing lack of experience. This boredom eventually turns into depression, and then the depression gets so severe that you wish you were dead. And it got to the point where I decided, you know what? Bedroom torture, I think, is a legitimate form of torture. If you were to take your average layman who lives a decent life with a nuclear family, a white picket fence, a job where he makes enough money to make ends meet, and even though this person maybe talks to a therapist and they have their own mental health issues and they have their own forms of suffering that they have to endure on a constant basis, whether it's a toxic workplace environment, a toxic spouse, health complications, etc. If you were to take this person who is your average discontented and you were to say, okay, as a scientific experiment where you will be under 24/7 surveillance, we are going to put you in a master bedroom, and we will provide everything through a slot, namely food and water. And let's say there's a toilet in that master bedroom with running water and a shower as well. And we say that we're going to see how long you can endure. Because even this person says, perhaps, sometimes I really hate my life. People make me suffer, so let me be peopleless. The world makes me suffer, so let it be worldless. The sensory integration of externality, the space-time continuum that we call the modernity of the outside world. I'm sick and tired of it. All of these obligations, all of these responsibilities, all of this pressure. Well, let's relieve you of that trouble. And another part of the experiment is you are not allowed to engage in any type of self-sexual pleasure, and you are not allowed to eat but more than one meal a day. One in particular that's not too excitatory. Like, let's say, chicken and rice with no seasoning or dipping sauce, alright? And he says, okay, I'm happy to do this experiment. And at first he's optimistic about it. He says, maybe this is the break that I need for my mental health. Maybe this will be restorative. But I would imagine after about a week, he would be bored out of his mind, suicidally depressed, and would realize that, in theory, I wanted to be worldless and peopleless. But in practice, this state of quiescence and being stationarily static, this is a lack of novelty. This is a emotion of non-emotion, which is the most terrible emotion of all. This is a activity of non-activity, which is the worst activity of all. This is nothingness. That is the very stillness and quietude that so many of us try to embrace. But we find that it's actually a form of torture. Literally, it can be. Even if you're introverted, even if you're asocial, it doesn't matter. There is nothing more damaging to your consciousness, at least for me, than bedroom torture. And that's the issue with so many of us with depression, is we don't want to go to work. We don't want to engage with our friends. We want to DoorDash everything. We just want to bed rot in the torture of the bedroom. But the thing is, we are correct when we say that people make me suffer and the world makes me suffer, but it's also true in the opposite. When you are peopleless and you are worldless, you are thereby left with the torture of the bedroom. And let's go back to this subject experiment. Perhaps he'd last for a week, and then he could not tolerate it anymore. Why can't he tolerate it anymore? Because there's nothing more unnatural to the human design than that of a lack of experience. Nothingness is just that. And you are left with something, all right. Even though you wanted quietude, even though you wanted stillness, and you aspired to nothingness, you are left with something, all right. And what is that somethingness that you're left with when you try to be an escapist and want nothing to do with the outside world? You are left with racing, intrusive thoughts. You are left with boredom, depression, and perhaps suicidality. And you are left with the sensation of like this whack-a-mole of desires, where as soon as one desire pops up, you hit it. But then as soon as you hit that one, 5 others pop up simultaneously, and you're constantly either playing the game of whack-a-mole of desire, or you're just letting this game operate like a broken carnival ride, and you're refusing, even though you want to, you're refusing to play the whack-a-mole game of desire, and you're just watching them rise and taunt you and terrorize you and then go back down. And then when you do actually start to satiate these desires when you're in this state, it's always the most petty and disgusting, trivial things, like eating a microwavable Hot Pocket and busting a nut. And it's like, whoop-de-doo, there's the highlight of my fucking day. You see? And that's what this practitioner, this subject matter, scientific inquiry, would discover. That even if he was being paid a lot of money to do this, I would wager that because it is a form of torture, he would only be able to last a week. If he was, for the sake of scientific advancement and for the money in question, continue for, let's say, up to a month or maybe 2 months, he would come out feeling broken and relieved that he is released from the prison, which was the bed rot, which was the torture of the bedroom. And he would return to his life, and he would have he would have a much better attitude. Because I'm telling you, when it comes to work, when it comes to family life, when it comes to fraternizing with our friends, when it comes to engaging with the world, whether professionally, recreationally, or domestically, at least you are able to feel a multiplicity of emotions. In other words, you are able to feel something. You feel angry. You feel anxious. You feel agitated at the task at hand. And sometimes you laugh out loud. Sometimes you even feel little intermittent spurts of joy. But at least you feel something. As opposed to bedroom torture and the bed rot, where you feel into the void of nothingness, which begets boredom and depression that just continues to get so bad that you just want your principle of sentient individuation to cease to exist at once. And it's always quite interesting to think, how can four walls, a ceiling, and a floor, and a bed and a chair be so madness inducing, where we are ridden with psychosis because of it? It's because damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yes, people make you suffer. The world makes you suffer, professionally, recreationally, domestically, even spiritually, even keeping up with current events, doing anything, and the exteriorization of the modernity, of the everydayness of the outside world. But we as humans, we need to feel a large variety of emotions, both positive and negative. We need to move around. We need to socially interact. We require these things. And yes, these things do make us suffer. And we hate it so much, oftentimes. But I'm telling you, I've discovered that for me, 9 to 5 work slavery, being in a toxic relationship, going to bars with my coworkers after work and getting drunk, waking up hungover, getting into fights, even though, in theory, there was a lot of unnecessary suffering that left me to the point of exhaustion, at least I felt every single emotional inch of the quantitative and qualitative intensity of these emotions and of this stimuli as it arose and as it vanished, and as it arose again and as it vanished. There was a kind of ebb and flow. But with bedroom torture, like I said, you just have nothing but the material dead objects that are completely lifeless, soulless, and heartless. That is all of the things that are in your bedroom. And that's what you're left with. And then you're left feeling lonely. You're left with a sensation of longing. And the only thing that you have to take the torture away of getting what you wanted, after all, you said, as I did, please just give me the opportunity to make the world go away. And then, lo and behold, you are left with mindlessly scrolling, eating microwavable food, and masturbating as the highlight of your day. Because at least it gave you temporary relief by distracting you from the unbearable heaviness of your own being, where lucidity is a kind of consciousness that is aware of its own consciousness, where awareness becomes aware of its own awareness. And you look in front of you, and you see a wall, and you open up your ears, and you hear that buzzing that is accompanied with complete silence. And you say, "Oh my God, I have to get drunk." And then you do that, and then barely gives any relief. Because what good is, I mean, drinking alone in a negative state of mind is just like a bad trip. I've heard of people talking about taking hallucinogenics and they have a really bad drug trip where they hallucinate and they see all kinds of horrific things. But one of the worst, quote, drug trips that I have experienced, and I think that anybody can experience, is drinking alone in a bad state of mind. In fact, statistically, I think the majority of people who unalive themselves did so under the state of alcohol. Because it gives you a good amount of dopamine, you feel good and drunk, like in the beginning, but then when that alcohol wears off, and you drink too early, and you're not going to be able to go to bed for another few hours, and you're left with that feeling, man, it's worse than being sober. You're going to soon regret it. Because alcohol is a activity that is supposed to be festive. It's supposed to be a extroverted and gregarious kind of a thing. But when you drink alone in a bad state of mind, it's the worst drug trip you could possibly imagine. After a couple hours, maybe a few hours if you're lucky, then you wake up hungover. And then you have to deal with the depression and the boredom and perhaps the suicidality in conjunction with a hangover on top of it. You see? And by the way, I have been sober, because I remember I was stressing that in my other videos where I said I struggled with alcoholism. I have been sober, except for one time when I relapsed. Because I gave in to the bedroom torture about 5 days ago. I just couldn't take it anymore. So I bought a 12-pack, and that's when I experienced what I just said. And then I woke up and I said never again, because alcohol ain't gonna do nothing for me anymore. It used to. But it's run its course, and now I can get no more delusionary benefit from it as far as dopamine release is concerned. Because it's like my dopamine receptors are clogged. Like, imagine a sink that has putty over the nozzle, so when you try to turn on the water, it's backed up and nothing comes out. That's how my dopamine receptors have been feeling. There's something about prolonged durations of time when it comes to isolation and no human and world contact that seems to do something detrimental to your dopamine receptors. Because I thought, because I've been dopamine deprived for so long, that if I drank to try to make that horrible feeling of emptiness go away, maybe I would just be, for once in my life, I would have a kind of drug-induced euphoric ecstasy that would be extremely intense, because I'm obviously not desensitized since I haven't had it in so long. But I swear to you, I hardly felt anything. And after it was all said and done, I ended up feeling worse, and I ended up vomiting and completely regretting it. And it's like that with food. It's like that with everything. I just couldn't take the bedroom torture anymore. It was driving me to such a point of madness that the mind-numbingness of it all, I still have not recovered. I've only been working part-time as of recently, and I've been walking to Starbucks, reading my book, drinking coffee, eating at restaurants, getting exercise, trying to converse with family members and join events as much as possible, and I think it has helped quite a bit. Because before I wouldn't have even had the strength to make videos, and I was only able to come up with like an intelligent paragraph for like 3 or 4 minutes, but then I just lost the energy to continue to talk. And then it was unuploadable. So I think I am improving at least enough to make a 30-minute video thus far. But I've learned that the mindset of the externalities of modernity, with all of its events that are an experience to you, and all of the people that are either agreeable or disagreeable to you, it comes with a lot of negative emotions. It comes with some positive emotions as well, perhaps to a lesser degree. But even if, for me, the bad of participating with reality outweighs the good, at least the bad things that I felt were real and legitimate sensations brought about by an actual stimuli that was powerful enough to arise something out of me. Because the stimuli was interactive and it was real, and it made me feel either really good, really bad, or something else. But at least the stimuli was interactive, and it was an experience to me, and it made me feel something. But when you are left with being sedentary and being emotionless, believe you me, you will not be thoughtless. Your mind will drive you insane. And you will not be without emotions, but it will be the emotion of non-emotion, which will, at some point, be such a self-internal putrefaction that it'll make you want to die. You will be so fatigued that you will not even have the strength to communicate with humans, even though you might want to. So, I did this experiment, and I failed. Now, there's nothing worse, in my estimation, than being alone in a room for prolonged periods of time. It's terrible for mind, body, and spirit. The atoms that comprise the four walls, the ceiling, and the floor, and all your furniture, they don't give a fuck about you. They provide shelter from the harsh elements and nothing else. You are completely dehumanized. You are completely denatured. And you are left sitting down with nothing but feelings of nothingness and an energy reserve that is akin to nothingness. And then you try to embrace the quiescence. You try to embrace the stillness, and you try to focus on your breathing and try to become an ascended master. But you end up just wanting to eat a fucking bullet. And then that very nothingness that you said that you wanted, you found that it was impossible. because that's only achievable through the end of sentience. That's only achievable through death. If you believe in a atheistic afterlife, when you try to aspire to nothingness, and the closest thing thereto is sensory deprivation, isolation, and a lack of human contact, if that's your idea of nothingness, then you're wrong. There's no such thing as nothingness while you are alive. While you are alive, there will always be something. And it will either make you feel something positive or negative, qualitatively and quantitatively, through an externality of a experiential stimuli from the outside world. At least it's organic, at least it's authentic, and at least however it made you feel is justified. And it's ambivalent because it makes you feel all kinds of ways, but at least it made you feel something. But with that bad that outweighed the good, you said, this is a somethingness that I want to do without. I'm going to aspire to nothingness. And then you will discover, as I did, that to aspire to nothingness is actually, in point of fact, an impossibility. That sensory deprivation, that isolation, that lack of human contact, it's going to leave you feeling something all right. And these four walls, and this ceiling, and this fucking floor, oh, that's something all right, isn't it? All that bed that you look at that's right next to you that you wish you could just sleep and hibernate like a bear. Oh, how you envy the bears and how they can just hibernate throughout the whole winter. How you wish that you could just sleep for weeks, months, or years on end. But you find that you get 7 to 8 hours and you're up for 15. And then you've been up for 9 hours and you continue to look at your bed and you look forward to sleeping. I remember I used to look forward to being a kid and waking up to go to school, to go play with my friends, or to go open up presents from Santa Claus. But now, as an adult, in the bedroom torture, I look at the bed, and that's what I have to look forward to, and I love it more than any kind of pleasure, whether drugs, food, sex, or otherwise, that I can have in this state of isolation. Nothing compares to being able to just go to sleep. And that is not good. There is no such thing as nothingness as long as sentience is a factor in waking consciousness, with eyes that see and ears that hear, and a body that is taking up space in time. It is not possible. You say, let it be worldless, let it be peopleless. I'm sick of the somethingness, I want nothingness. When you go to nothingness, you are left with a lot of things. Namely, a chair, a dresser on your right hand, a mattress on your left hand, and maybe, if you're lucky, a cat that awkwardly stares at you all day, like you are the most fascinating thing to have ever walked the face of the earth. And you're looking back at the cat and you're like, how could you just stare at me in this condition all day without losing your fucking mind? I'm talking to my cat right now. And then you envy the cat, because the cat can just loaf, sleep 60% of the time, and when it's awake, it can just stare at dead, inanimate household objects and stare at you. And you're their bread and butter. You're their light and joy. They could just stare at you sitting down, twiddling your fucking thumb, staring at the wall, and they're happy to do so. And you say, boy, I envy the cat. But humans, we're too lucid. Consciousness has evolved so much with us that we are aware of our own consciousness. And that's a curse. We have thoughts that counter our thoughts, that are aware that they are thoughts. It is a kind of thinkingness that is aware that it is thinking, a kind of thought that is aware that it is a thought, and you need something to distract you from that. And if it's bad, or if it's good, at least it's a qualitative and quantitative duality of an experiential. When you get rid of that, you will not be happy for the same reason that the prisoner in his cell is never happy. The only difference between you and the prisoner in this state is you have more space to move around. But at least the prisoner gets to interact sociably and even fold towels, go to work, and do all of this seemingly mind-numbing shit. And maybe it is mind-numbing, but not as mind-numbing as solitary confinement. Solitary confinement is basically this bedroom torture. And there is nothing more mind-numbing that will make you go mad faster. And then you say, but Garrett, in the outside world, to me, it is just as mind-numbing, it is just as maddening, and it makes me also feel bored and suicidally depressed. Right, that's the paradox. You have the choice of, do I want to feel terrible? Or do I want to feel bored and depressed exclusively? Well, you say, well, I'm bored and depressed when I engage in my life. And yeah, I would be bored and depressed if I was completely isolated as well. But at least with that which is professional, recreational, and domestic, with the human contact, that is the interplay in question, you're able to feel more intensely, whether for good or bad. But with bedroom torture, you literally feel nothing. It's like maybe your hatred for your boss or your coworker or all of the vices that you engage in, maybe gossiping with your friends behind somebody else's back, maybe kissing and making up with your ex, and then falling back in love again, but then being argumentative and going your separate ways only to kiss and make up again. Maybe all of these trivialities, even though they're negative, maybe that is preferable because it's an emotional roller coaster, but at least you feel a multiplicity. But when you try to embrace nothingness, you have no choice but to embrace singularity. And when you embrace singularity, you are left with the individual without an interlocutor. And when you are an individual without an interlocutor, you have no choice but to talk to yourself. And that's sad. You have no choice but to make yourself your own best friend and your own worst enemy. Because at least in the outside world, you had a best friend and you had a worst enemy. But it wasn't yourself. But when you leave all that behind, you become your own best friend and you become your own worst enemy. Because when a man is isolated without an interlocutor, he will eventually create a world of his own, or her own. Kind of like Tom Hanks when he made friends with that soccer ball. In that movie where he was stranded on that island. I forgot the name of the movie. I'm sure most of you have seen it. That's kind of what happens. So it's basically pick your poison. What I have decided is it's good to have a balance between the two. See, most people who call themselves introverted don't realize that they are extroverted maybe 40% of the time, sometimes 50% of the time. And yes, they have that downtime where they say, I get to enjoy isolation because I'm an introvert. But really, they were balanced. They weren't entirely introverted nor entirely extroverted. There was a balance. What I do now is I am mostly introverted, but I'm forcing myself to be extroverted, hopefully half of my day, to keep myself occupied. Whether it's going for a walk or... See, I kind of live life like an old man who lost his wife a few years ago who's living on retirement money. They always have breakfast at an exact place, at an exact time. They order the same thing on the menu. The waitress knows him by name. He knows her by name. He's a regular everywhere he goes, and he always shows up at the same time. That's kind of what I've become lately. I wake up at a certain time. I try to have a strict routine to keep me distracted from myself and to make silence and stillness something that I about face. Because when you go into that abyss, it will consume you. But you will not die, but you will wish you were dead. So I said, no more silence, no more stillness, no more nothingness. I'm going to go out there where there's a lot of human movement, where there's a lot of noise, where there is a lot of somethingness. But I am going to disengage. I'm just going to listen to my classical music and observe and read my book and take in the atmosphere. There's a lot of life out there, even though I might claim to be a misanthrope. There's a lot of life out there. But in this room, the only intelligent life form is me, and I'm surrounded with inanimate objects that don't give a fuck about me, or even are aware that I exist because they are dead. They are dead, soulless, heartless pieces of shit that only serve a utility. The door opens and closes. The dressers store my clothing. The bed serves as a utility for sleep. The hangers for hanging clothes. And you just name off the inanimate objects one by one, and they're just a function to be utilized for a certain purpose. And nothing more. But they, in and of themselves, are dead, for they are lifeless. And when you really feel into how lifeless the inanimate objects are surrounding you, you become very sensitive to that if you're isolated for long enough, but you realize that it's malice and callous. It is a kind of darkness without any possibility of the light, even if your fluorescence is shining bright from the bulb. I don't care if your room is lit by some kind of an artificial fluorescent light bulb. It is pure darkness that makes itself visible. It is malice and it is callous. It does not have a heart. It does not have a soul. It does not have a mind. And even though this sounds obvious, and maybe even kind of stupid or crazy that I would point that out, when you do not venture into nature and you are isolated among dead, inanimate things, the dead, inanimate things, and this is a kind of psychosis, by the way, will start to develop their own theory of mind. You will start to feel into the personhood / lack thereof of every individual thing. And you will see that it is nothing but a cold, dead utility and nothing else. And you will feel into it. And for some strange reason, you will be stricken by fear and a kind of dread, a kind of gloom, a kind of anxiety that will make you panic, as if the walls are closing in on you, as if materiality itself is becoming antagonistic towards you, as if the walls are laughing in your face. And then you realize that you've been isolated for so long that you've gone mad. Because now a dresser is not a dresser. It is a torture device, and it is ugly, and it pisses you off. Now, the material objectivity of every individual object in your room is no longer the functionality of its purpose. It is a torture device that is a dagger in your consciousness that pisses you off. I remember my mother in the last year of her life when she was bedridden because of her chronic illness when she was on hospice. What she would complain about more so than her physical pain or the fact that she was dying was the fact that she was trapped in a room. We would all sympathize with her. But she complained about that more than anything else. She would cry. And she would say, "What is more painful to me than what my body is undergoing as it's actively dying is the fact that I am stuck in this room. I hate being stuck in this room. Please carry me to the living room. Carry me outside. Get me out of this room." But even though it was understandable, I wasn't able to fully comprehend the severity of what she was talking about until very recently, and now I get it. I get it. And you know something? The very state of nature in the wilderness that I claim to hate with all my heart and mind, because, I say things like, it's nothing but predator-prey dynamics of animals eating each other alive from the crotch upward. Just nothing but a carnivorous feeding frenzy of the strong, feasting upon the flesh of the weak forever and ever, with all kinds of creepy crawlies that are poisonous, with all kinds of poisonous fruits, harsh elements. But you know something? Even though that may be true, at least nature is interesting with its morbidities. At least nature is wide open space and fresh air. At least nature does not lie to you. When you see the intestine of a rabbit dangling from the mouth of a bear, it's showing you exactly what it is. It's not trying to pretend to be something it's not. But when I look at this unnatural, artificial bedroom, I say, what is this horrible place? And this is the very apotheosis of what the human strives for. They work their 9-to-5 slave job just to have this. But at least their 9-to-5 slave job gives them a break from the very thing that they are trying to uphold and keep afloat. But if they were to just go on unemployment and have to be subjugated to bedroom torture, I'm sure many of them would realize that even though I didn't like my job very much, at least I got to take a break from the very bedroom that tortures me, that I worked the majority of my life to have. That's how sad this world is. This world is so sad and pathetic and fucked up that the best part about going to work is the fact that we are finding relief from the very thing that we are working by the sweat of our brow to be able to come home to. We escape it and we get some relief from it, only to work to maintain it so you don't get evicted just to come back home to it. But when you come back home to it, at least you realize, hey, I did all this work to uphold this place, and at least I got to take a fucking break from it. Because a lot of us, we don't really have a frame of reference for what it's like to truly be isolated. Because since we've been 18, maybe we've gotten kicked out of the house. Our parents said, get a job. So we've been working, we've been maintaining the biological well-being to our spouse and to our children, providing shelter, and it's never really been an option to know what it's like to have true bedroom torture, because you sleep with your spouse, she's right there with you. Your children are in the living room with you, you get to enjoy their company, and you get to have a break from it all domestically by going to work. But when the spouse and the children and the work get taken away and you're just left with nothing but a home, you will do anything to make it stop. Because the funny thing is I say to my room right now, oh my God, it's so mind-numbing. Please make it stop. But the funny thing is it's literally not doing anything. It's like as if the bedroom can talk. It would say, "What are you talking about?" Quote, "Make it stop. I'm literally not doing anything." And then I say, "Yeah, that's the fucking point. I'm just a sentient agent with autonomy. And yet, I am surrounded by that which is non-sentient, that doesn't have any autonomy, that is unconscious, that does not move. I fucking hate you. Because you are everything that I am not." And I understand that this sounds crazy. I may sound like a lunatic right now, but I'm sure most of you have experienced bedroom torture and the kinds of psychosis that will arise in so doing. So a lot of you, perhaps most of you, know what I'm talking about, but there's some of you that might not get it, and you're lucky. Because I am thankful that the sound of my own voice, insofar as making this video thus far, has distracted me from how much I despise the very ground in which I walk on, and the very four walls that protect me from the elements of the outside. Holy shit. Anyway, back to what I was saying about nature. Even though nature is a carnivorous feeding frenzy of predator-prey dynamics, like I said, nature, at the very least, we have to give it to him, or her, is nature has novelty. Nature is fascinating. You can look at all of the colors of the greenery. You can look at the trees. You could look at the grass. You could look at the animals running around. And even though it's a part of the hellscape of this prison reality, I can tell you I would much rather sit in the middle of the forest, being preoccupied, swatting mosquitoes, and watching animals devour each other, and me being on guard, not looking to get eaten by a fucking bear, as I got a gun in my pocket, prepared for the worst that might come. At least being in that state, I am preoccupied with dealing with stressful stimuli and enjoying the scenery of the beauty that surrounds me. Because even though nature is evil, with its predator-prey dynamics and its creepy, crawly blood-suckingness, we have to give credit where credit is due. Nature is beautiful, and it is authentic. It doesn't try to pretend to be something it's not. And that's all of this, I wouldn't say admiration, but giving credit where credit is due. I will acknowledge that nature, with its behavior, is fascinating, and there's a lot of novelty that is interesting for an observer to behold. And me, as an observer, I would rather behold green grass and flowers and watch animals and watch fish in the river and all those kinds of things than to sit here and observe my fucking doorknob and the white paint on my bare walls with no posters or paintings or anything. That is the worst thing of all. The only movement that I see other than my own is my cat getting up to take a shit to use its litter box. And I feel so strongly about this now that I actually am beginning to sympathize with prisoners. I've come to the conclusion that I think euthanasia should be provided to everybody. including prisoners. Because there's no reason why anybody should have to endure this type of cruel and unusual punishment. Now, for me, it wasn't technically cruel and unusual punishment because I did it voluntarily to myself, but to lock somebody in this exact scenario for 30, 40, 50 years, to have to endure what I've endured without any possibility of unaliving themselves, regardless of the crime, and they say the punishment needs to fit the crime, be that as it may, I don't think something that horrible should exist. I think that they should have the option at any time to get a lethal injection. Because, to be honest, let's say they did the most heinous sexual crime you could possibly imagine. Okay? Why do we want something that evil to exist in the first place? Let alone such a loathsome creature to exist, being nothing but a ball of negative energy that's just trapped in a fucking cell for decades and decades and decades to come. I say just kill the evil fucker, so it doesn't have to make other people suffer, nor it itself has to suffer anymore. See, that's a good happy medium. If you're an evil fucker, you're so miserable that you probably want to die anyway. And maybe you deserve it. So you're really doing them a favor. But now, when it comes to somebody who, let's say, in some states, for instance, you can go to jail for like up to 5 years just for having a small amount of marijuana on your person, and then they have to endure the misery of this type of isolation torture. Again, if 5 years is too much, which they shouldn't be incarcerated in the first place for something so stupid, but if 5 years is too much for them to endure, and they hated their life in the outside world anyway, then I don't see why it's so controversial for anybody at any time to be able to just go to a hospital, admit themselves, and say, look, I want to end it. That's how bad I find this type of isolation to be. I find it to be so torturous that were one to have to endure it, regardless of the nature of their criminality, I think that they should have a right to death. Because at least, for instance, like in the medieval period, when you were being tortured in the most barbaric and horror movie type fashions imaginable by the Catholic Church towards the heretics, let's say in the Crusades, even though the pain was prolonged and it was cruel and it was unusual, at some point they had to die. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Sometimes they would be alive for as long as a week, sometimes maybe less, sometimes maybe more, but eventually, with every agonizing second of their torture, they eventually died shortly after. But with this type of torture, even though you will not be bruised, you will not draw blood, you will not have bones broke, you will be completely unscathed with your vital signs fully intact. But yet, this is a kind of torture that is so insidious and gets progressively worse that you eventually wish you were dead, and it's only been several months. Now imagine if you prolong that for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. You're going to tell me that that at least quantitatively, is not a worser form of torture than the kind of torture they did in medieval time? I don't think so, buddy. I don't think so. You can torture somebody with a blowtorch and a pair of pliers for 14 hours. Brutal. Just fucking brutal. But you want to compare that to 10, 20 years of solitary confinement? Solitary confinement would win by a damn sight. Because the first was dead within 14 hours, but this one, you wish you were dead. And 20 years goes by and you're still alive. And you go and see the doctor and they take your blood pressure. They draw your blood and they say you're healthy as a horse. And you're middle-aged. You still have 30 more years or 40 years to go. Please kill me, please kill me, please kill me. Okay? That's what this bedroom torture is. So now, I venture into the outside world with the attitude of life sucks and life is sometimes good. There are intermittent bursts of happiness. There are intermittent bursts of laughter. Sometimes I'm content, sometimes I'm indifferent, sometimes I'm agitated, sometimes I'm any human emotion that you can possibly imagine, going from one to the other, to the other, to the other, but at least I felt something. And I find that even though that's unideal, it is certainly better than the torture of the bedroom. Anything but that.